enforcement, the City of Glendale wants to inform the public of the dangers of distracted driving and to encourage vigilance while crossing the street. If you're driving, don't be driven to distraction. And if you're walking, look to live.
Okay, we'll come to order. Today is the Wednesday, April 6, 2011, regular meeting of the Glendale Planning Commission. Would you call roll, please?
Here.
Commissioner Sheets.
Here.
Commissioner Yasayan.
Here.
Chairperson Kane.
Here. Roll call, please. I'm sorry. Report regarding posting of agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, March 30th, 2011, on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website.
All right, would everyone please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, approval of minutes from the March 16th meeting. Any comments or corrections?
I move that we approve the minutes. Second.
Motion and support. Call roll, please.
Aye. Aye.
Commissioner Yasayan.
Aye.
Chairperson Kane.
Aye. On a vote of 4-0, the minutes of March 16th, 2011 were approved without comment. Agenda item 5 is oral communications. I have no speaker cards for that item. The next item would be a zoning appeal. We do know our 5th commissioner is on her way, so I am going to ask with my fellow commissioners' blessing that we go into recess as we await for her arrival. Any objections? All right, we will be in recess pending her arrival. Looks like we're back in session. We're continuing the Wednesday, April 6, 2011 regular meeting in Glendale Planning Commission. Let the record show that Ms. Landrigan has joined us, and we will now move on to zoning appeals, new business variance case PVAR 2010-2013. The next item is an appeal from the decision of the planning hearing officer. This matter is heard as a de novo hearing. Testimony given at the planning hearing officer's hearing should be repeated because the commission does not review the tapes of those meetings. Decisions rendered today will be based on the evidence presented at this meeting and the evidence in the file, including appeal documents, staff reports, and letters received. Individuals speaking today should therefore present all the evidence which they may wish this commission to consider. A handout describing the appeals process is available at the front counter. The variance case is PVAR 2010-013. It's located at 3505 Sierra Vista Avenue. The applicant and appellant is Ernest Demas, who is also the owner. It is an appeal of the planning and hearing officer's denial of an application for standards variance to construct a 224 square foot rear addition to an existing single-family residence without providing the required 2 covered and enclosed parking spaces. The planning and hearing officer denied the variance on December 28, 2010. The applicant appealed the denial on January 11, 2011. The project is exempt from CEQA, and staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission sustain the planning and hearing officer's denial. We have staff overview, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The first and only case item tonight is the appeal of case number PVR 2010-013. The subject property is located in the R1 low-density residential zone. I'm going to quickly describe the existing characteristics of the site. The site is a 6,500 square foot lot with a single-family dwelling built in 1927 with a 2-car detached garage. In 1953, a building permit was issued to add a bath within the existing 2-car garage and attach a 361 square foot recreation room. This converted a portion of the 2-car garage into floor area for the recreation room, leaving a 1-car garage. On to the summary of the planning hearing officer's decision. The planning hearing officer was not able to make 4 of the required findings for the approval of the standards variance on December 1st, 2010. The hearing officer determined that the existing site layout, lot size, and topography did not create a hardship to any significant degree or limit construction for new covered and enclosed parking space. After reviewing all aspects of the site conditions, permit history, and submitted findings with documentation, the hearing officer determined that granting of the variance will in fact be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance. On to the summary of the appellant's discussion. The appellant states that the hearing officer refused to hear or consider facts before rendering his decision. The applicant contains that he provided documentation that was insufficient to show features of the proposed remodel and current site conditions. The appellant states that new evidence of the site conditions and of the proposal that were not previously mentioned could not make that determination. The applicant has stated in conversations with staff that the hearing officer refused to consider the submitted parking survey, letters of neighborhood support, and photographs displaying ample off-site street parking. On to the analysis of staff's of the variance request. The goal of the ordinance is to provide minimum parking standards for the single-family development. It is the objective of the ordinance to bring the number of parking spaces to code standards when an addition is made. As with any variance application, the burden of proof resides in the applicant to prove that to the hearing officer that such a request meets the standards of the ordinance. The appellant states on the application that new exhibits will be prepared to illustrate the above conditions. However, no exhibits have been reviewed or submitted by the Planning Division for further review. The proposal includes a 224 square foot addition while maintaining an existing 9.7 by 17.7 non-conforming one-car garage at the rear of the property. The zoning code requires 2 covered and enclosed parking spaces. There is an accessory structure comprised of 1 covered and enclosed garage and a guest house located at the northwest corner of the lot. This accessory structure is separated from the house by approximately 26 feet, which can accommodate the necessary 25-foot turn radius as displayed in the submitted site plan. A code-compliant 2-car covered and enclosed parking space could be constructed by converting a portion of the existing accessory structure back into a garage space, with demolishing a small portion of the rec room, without resulting in any practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships. The applicant argued that the addition only adds a minimal amount of square footage to the existing bedroom without any other proposed changes to the existing single-family residence. The applicant also states that no additional occupants will live in the residence. While this may be true, staff believes that the strict applications and provisions of the ordinance would not result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship, and that any hardship caused by this application would be self-inflicted. The majority of lots in the immediate area consist of 2-car covered and enclosed parking spaces based on a site visit and aerial photographs. The applicant submitted a parking survey and photographs that documented the availability of on-street parking in the area. The applicant also submitted letters of support. None of this information demonstrated any unique circumstances applicable to the subject property as it pertains to lot size or existing topographic conditions. The submitted parking study and photographic evidence are irrelevant to the question of providing code-compliant on-site parking or demonstrate some type of hardship. The appellant has stated that a new parking survey will be presented at the meeting. If this variance was approved, it will be detrimental to the public welfare as it may be precedent-setting and contrary to the objectives of the zoning code. With that said, staff recommends that the Planning Commission sustain the planning hearing officer's determination and deny this application. That concludes my presentation. I have one last thing to add. Today, staff received written communication from the a board member for the Montrose Verdugo Spar Heights Neighborhood Association. Andrea Humberger briefly states that she is in support of the denial of this application. And a copy has been provided for the planning commissioners.
Mr. Lee?
Mr. Lee.
A couple questions. One is, in the statement that you mentioned that the applicant has not turned in I guess the data or the findings that could hinder decisions here. Did you receive those documents from the applicant?
No, I have not.
Okay. Now, the second is that the clarification purposes, on your write-up on page 4, you mentioned about, on the top, paragraph there, about code-compliant two-car covered and enclosed parking space could be constructed by converting a portion of the existing accessory structure back into a garage space and demolish a small portion of the patio without resulting in any practical difficulties. What do you mean? Can you build second garage there? Thus, that they could, by a little modification, have two-car garage there? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I understand. If I can maybe possibly describe it.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is staff's opinion that the applicant, that this was a two-car garage at one time. Staff was stating that the applicant can convert a portion of this back into the two-car required garage. Today's standards, a minimum the minimum interior dimension for a code-compliant parking garage is 20 by 20. So a portion of this would be demolished and possibly a little bit extended in order to make the code-compliant garage.
What's the existing width, please?
The existing width is 18 feet.
And you have enough clearance in front of it, the 25-foot radius?
That's it. Actually, there's displaying 26 to the edge of the residence. However, there's a small patio that's maybe less than 18 inches that can be modified in order to make that turn radius.
So if the applicant agrees to modify so that he has a two-car garage there, you have no problem with us?
We have no problem.
Any other? Sorry, I'm sure I'm brushing and shooting. Any other questions for staff at this time? Seeing none. Okay, Ms. Williams. Oh, I'm sorry. One moment. Please, I'm sorry.
So the existing deck goes all the way across, and they're going to remove some of the deck anyway to put the new addition on, correct? Is that a new deck?
I believe that is an existing deck. I could have the applicant clarify that,
Okay.
but I do not believe, based on a submitted photograph, that the deck does not span the entire length of
Okay.
the residence, but the applicant.
I didn't have it, well, see, I don't know if it went all the way to here or not. Okay, thank you.
I did have. You stated in.
We've got it in the backyard, so.
You haven't.
We,
Stated you haven't
I have not received.
received.
We did, and that has been misplaced.
I'm sorry, what was misplaced?
The original parking survey.
Thank you.
It was done by the homeowner. I believe, and the homeowner could find that, but I believe.
All right, well, let's have the appellant now step forward. Ms. Williams, you have up to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Kane and members of the commission. My name is Janelle Williams. I'm at 2418 Honolulu Avenue in Montrose, not too far from the subject property. I was actually at his variance hearing on another case, and I sat through his hearing. I thought it was interesting, and when I spoke with him afterwards, and he indicated to me when he initially approached city staff to inquire about adding 224 square feet, he met with one of the senior staff members at the public counter. That planner's opinion was that his request was of such a minor nature that a variance was not required. Only an administrative exception would be required. No public hearing, just an internal review, just paperwork and fees. The planner gave him the required forms and the affidavits. Mr. Demis prepared the application himself. He provided the requested documents and fees, and the administrative exception application was received and logged by that same staff member, and that information was not disclosed to you tonight in your information packet. Sometime after that, Mr. Demis was contacted by staff and was informed that the administrative exception application was improper, even though he was guided by staff to apply for the administrative exception due to the minor nature of his request. Now a variance was necessary. The request did not change, just the person who was reviewing the application. What started out as a minor issue only requiring staff approval through administrative process somehow was reviewed by a staff member who took a more literal and strict interpretation of the code, and suddenly the variance was required. Still, though, shouldn't be a big deal, just go through the process. Mr. Demis had no idea that denial was already a foregone conclusion, and once his application was reviewed in that strict and narrow manner, it was set up to fail. The issue is parking and the provision of parking on private property. The intention of the code is not to thwart the effort of citizens who want to make modest upgrades to their homes, especially when there's no need to provide more off-street parking than what exists. The code does envision a property upgrade from time to time and does not intend to unduly burden its citizens. The neighbors are aware of this application, and they wrote letters of support that were submitted to the staff, and probably you don't have those in your packet either. The applicant is requesting permission to add 224 square feet to his home. This addition is for an upgrade to an existing small master bedroom and providing a bathroom for that bedroom where there was only one bathroom in the house. This does nothing to intensify the use of this property. The number of bedrooms will remain exactly 2. After the variance hearing, while the matter was under submission and a decision letter had not yet been generated, the hearing officer took leave from work. The variance hearing was on December the 1st. The decision letter came out on December the 28th. In the interim, the variance application disappeared from the case file. We provided the copy of the variance application for your packet today. Mr. Demis also provided a parking survey, which he conducted himself. It shows that at no time is there ever more than 20% of the 40 available parking spaces that he had counted on the street ever utilized. Mr. Demis and most of the neighbors use their driveways. His study was conducted on 11/28, 11/29, and 11/30 of 2010, and that study also disappeared from the case file. I recently did an informal windshield survey. I did an informal windshield survey of parking this past Saturday night, once at 6 p.m. and again at 8 p.m. Again, it was informal. I also checked on Monday morning before work because I work in the neighborhood. I checked yesterday at noontime, and again, I checked last night. And in all instances, there was 60 to 80% available parking on that street. There are no parking restrictions on the street, so it's available for parking at all times. But most of the neighbors use their driveways. I also wanted to note, whenever there's an issue of parking with an application, the expert in the Traffic and Transportation Division, you may be aware of Mr. Tom Mitchell, is always consulted by the Planning Division. In many instances, he will require a parking study if there's any question at all about parking adequacy. I have done several parking studies under his direction, and some with very unfavorable outcomes. An interdepartmental communication regarding this application was sent to him for comment as well. But in your planning packet, if you notice, you look at page 2 of the Planning Hearing Officer's staff report, the only comments reported as being received by staff were from Glendale Water and Power and from Maintenance Services. Evidently, staff failed to note or provide what I think is the most important comment sheet from Tom Mitchell in Traffic and Transportation. Mr. Mitchell states, among other things, that the driveway has 90 feet of storage capacity between the garage and the street, and that any increase in parking could be accommodated in the driveway. This memo was omitted from the staff report, but not the Glendale Water and Power or Maintenance Services memo. Did this memo also disappear from the case file? I don't know. If it did, then the hearing officer did not have benefit of this memo, and if not, then why wasn't it included in the staff report? I find that hugely important and questionable. How can an impartial hearing officer render a decision without a complete case file to review? This is the memo, and also a memo from Ernie regarding a conversation that he had with the police parking supervisor, who indicated that the only call that they had had for service regarding parking issue was that someone had complained about a 72-hour car that was parked there. Mr. Demas thought he was receiving support from staff, or at least direction that would lead him to a nicer home without breaking the bank and causing him to lose or give up another portion of his lot for more covered parking. The strict application of the code would lead to an unnecessary hardship that would cause more than double the lot coverage he's asking for. He's not adding bedrooms. Remember, it's just a bath that he's adding, which would bring the total bathrooms in the house to 2. Do you think this is excessive? I don't think so. The granting of the variance would not be detrimental to the public welfare. We did a neighborhood compatibility study that covered the 300 linear feet and the contiguous properties to the rear of the subject property. This is required for design review board submittal, and we thought we would look at it in terms of this variance application. And it shows that even after the addition of 224 square feet to this property, after the addition, this house is still below the neighborhood average in terms of floor area and floor area ratio. It also shows that there are 9 one-car garages in the study area, which is the 300 linear feet and contiguous to the rear. And many of those are clustered around his house. This is a reasonable request that, in our opinion, was just dismissed out of hand, without much thought, without much consideration. The application packet was mishandled and portions of the file disappeared, which left the hearing officer without much to review. Past the hearing and after his return from leave, which was when the decision letter was generated. We provided staff with our copy of the original variance application for this hearing tonight, but still, the hearing officer had no application or parking study before him upon his return when he wrote the decision letter. He may not have seen the memo from Traffic and Transportation, which has been an important determinant factor in every case involving parking requirements that I've ever been involved in or been aware of. Now, the code envisions allowing property owners to keep their properties well maintained and to improve or modernize from time to time to encourage the continuation of owner-occupied homes in Glendale. All improvements on the property have been permitted. This should have been an administrative exception, and with staff interpretations varying so broadly, unfortunately, the administrative exception request had to run a gauntlet of staff until somebody interpreted interpreted that a variance was needed. At that point, it seems like the denial was a foregone conclusion. With this application, Glendale was not well served. Applying for a minor consideration should not be a crapshoot in the city of Glendale. Mr. Demis should not have to rely on the luck of the draw or the interpretation of a dissenting staff member when the comfort, peace, and quiet enjoyment of his very home is at stake. By this application, the intent of the code is maintained in every manner, and Mr. Demis's living environment can receive a modest upgrade. The home was built in 1927, and no upgrades have taken place to the home. That's correct? Yeah. Mr. Demis uses his own driveway anyhow. And since he's not adding bedrooms or intensifying the use of his property in any way, his parking requirement will not change. It will stay exactly the same. Improving an existing bedroom and bathroom is hardly an intensification of use. I could understand if he were adding bedrooms. That would mean he would be adding people and cars. But he's not. You know, for want of a modestly better, more comfortable living situation, by adding 224 square feet, the strict application of the code requirements for parking in this case would result in the destruction of a portion of the existing deck at the rear of his home, destruction of the existing laundry room, the loss of a significant portion of his backyard, the loss of a pomegranate tree, the loss of a grafted lemon and orange tree, the destruction of a mature muscat grape arbor, not to mention the loss or relocation of the urban vegetable garden, all of which Ernie cultivates and tends himself. So your staff report and packet do not include Mr. Demis's parking study, the letters of support from the neighbors, the administrative exception application, or the communication from traffic and transportation. So that is my presentation.
All right. Does your client wish to speak at this time? I know we'll have some questions, but I'd like to get anything he'd like to say in first.
I think he's here just to answer questions that
All right.
you have of him or that I can't answer.
All right. Then as the questions are asked, if you think it's appropriate for you to answer, just come on up while Ms. Williams
I'll do the best I can.
is dancing around it.
Right.
All right. Questions for the appellant, Mr. Lee?
So, I guess housekeeping here. I see that the administrative exception application was turned in October 20th, and I'm assuming your variance application was turned in on also October 20th, according to our staff report here. Is that correct?
No.
The administrative exception was turned in
Mike?
earlier.
Oh, you need to come up. That's why we were saying, if there's something for you to answer, that's where you need to be at the mic. Thank you. And identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, I'm Ernie Demis. I'm the homeowner. Thank you for your time. No, they were not done simultaneously. The administrative exception was applied for, and then it was denied, and then I was told, just as Janelle Williams said, after it was denied, we were told that I had to have a variance instead, and that was submitted later. The administrative exception might have been submitted as much as a year before. I don't have the exact date, but this is all over quite a period of time.
Okay. I see. Okay, so, and Tom Mitchell wrote his response back in July. So the November 28th says traffic study. Has this been part of your application where our staff had this record?
I did submit that when I had my hearing on December 1st, yes.
Okay.
Let me build on this, because we have an issue here, a little bit of an issue, in terms of what the staff report is saying versus what the applicant is saying, which seems to be in echo of this. Administrative exception application dated 10/20/09. However, in the staff report on page 2, you're talking about 10/20/09 as a variance application. So what I'm not seeing is when the variance application really was, and I think this should have been, the 1029 should have been the notice of the administration exception. That's where you're going with that, right?
Because I cannot see any date on this variance application here.
Right.
The actual date-stamped variance application is missing from the file, so what you have is the copy that we provided that was not date-stamped.
So do we know the date?
The case was heard on December the 1st, though.
I guess all we're pointing out right now is
Yeah.
there's a discrepancy in the
Right.
staff report. And that sometime before the hearing, he filed the variance.
Right. And I guess this question is more towards our staff, is that, you rendered a decision not having all this application information?
No, we did have this application.
Were you the hearing officer?
No, I was not.
Who was the hearing officer?
Brad Collins.
All right, very good. So between the two of you, we can, all right.
There was an application that was filed. It was sometime after the administrative exception. The administrative exception was first filed by the homeowner to do a 224 square foot addition. However, upon further review, you cannot apply for an administrative exception with a square footage exceeding 100 square feet.
Yeah, that's,
No,
and that is Planning 101. That's
Right,
well
right.
known.
Right.
Correct.
Why would somebody have taken an administration exception when it's over 100 square feet? How did that happen?
That,
Was
that's
that you?
unfortunate.
Do we know who took that? There's
It-
initials.
Yes, we do, and we can
Name names.
track
Who
that.
was it?
That would be Senior Planner Roger Kiesel.
Roger Kiesel knows very well what the rules of administration exception are. I can't believe something like that would have happened. Continue on.
And, this report that they turned in should have been part of our file, but, it was not part of the file here, so
Is that the...
it's a traffic report from Tom Mitchell.
Shows the
Okay.
Yeah, that's another point. We got a staff report that we don't have all the information on. First, there's an error in it. Then, we always get these. We always get the comments from departments, and yet we don't have them. And we're having an applicant come in and give us this stuff. Ms. Landergan?
Plus the variance number here, which is PVAR 2010-013, should tell you what date the variance was actually filed, and we don't have that on here. So can you get that information for us?
Sure. I will do.
It's usually about 4 months before the hearing,
Yeah.
but I don't know the date.
Got it down to,
Now, question for the applicant. We do see some, I guess, the housekeeping issues here. But besides that, one of the questions I asked the staff was that, you apply for variances if there's no alternative in your plan, to make any type of modification. In this case, you do have an alternative to comply with the code. By having another garage built there, you do have 25-foot radius, turning radius, which will allow you to just, go through this whole process without having any problems. Is the applicant, Mr. Demis, willing to, comply with the code, or all he needs to do is just...
But he's asking
yeah.
for the variance because, you could say that for just about any variance. If it requires the demolition of something or the total destruction of what he's built for himself in order to have 224 square feet, you could say that with any. What is reasonable? In this case, I think, if you look at the compatibility study that we submitted tonight, you can see that we're not asking for anything that's out of the norm for that neighborhood. We're not going up a story. We're not over-intensifying the use. We're not adding bedrooms. We think it's reasonable, since we're not going to increase the parking demand. There is no issue with parking now. We don't see any issue in the future. This is requiring a two-car garage for this 224 square foot addition is an exercise.
Well, we
would be an
yeah.
exercise, and it would be overly burdensome for this property owner
Well, we respect
to
that.
affect that.
Right, we respect that. At the same token, really, the code is there. Obviously, 100-foot, square foot addition, will qualify under administrative exception. But anything above that, 200 to some people is a very significant addition, significant improvement. So, when you apply to have your, modification of that change, it is in some, in our steps, maybe in some of us here, we think that might be significant, where you might be, think is reasonable. So it's really,
But for instances like that, that's why we have a variance process. This is the very minimum that he could do to upgrade his home, which was built in 1927, and it's a minimal request. And it shouldn't trigger all of this, all of this construction, which would also, wipe out a significant portion of his backyard. And all the these trees that he's planted and has cultivated and all this other stuff that
well, obviously, with all respect, that your addition, 224 square foot addition that you're requesting, rose from the need to have that expansion to the bedroom, correct?
Yeah, but I think the code, I think the code recognizes that people are going to want to do modest upgrades from time to time, and the variance process is there to help these property owners, these citizens of Glendale, to get through, so that he can
Mr. Lee,
pull a building permit.
let me interject, because you're framing the question very well, but maybe we can, and that kind of is the center point of what we're talking
Sure.
about, but maybe we can get some other questions in
Sure.
and kind of continue that,
Sure.
that point. Ms. Landergan, you had some questions? Or a
Yes,
question?
thank you for the additional paperwork. I'm looking at the administrative exception application, and I am looking at Part 4 findings of fact. And I'm looking at A, how will the granting of the exception result in design improvements, or how do the space restrictions of the site preclude full compliance with code requirements without hardship? And I don't think that answer is sufficient. And what I'm seeing here is the garage attached laundry room is permitted. It will be hard to enlarge the extra garage, and I'm sorry I can't really read it. It's easy to live with one-car garage. Those are not hardships. It is not an answered question. So, and even if this was an exception, I could see it being denied just for that answer. So you have to make all 4 findings. You can't make 3 findings, and I think you've done an excellent job of substantiating the other 3 findings. But I haven't heard anything that you've been able to tell me that really indicates that there is a situation here that is not a self-imposed hardship. And I'm saying that to you because perhaps there's something else you can say, but even in this application here, it doesn't meet the litmus test.
No. I don't know who prepared that application.
I think the
I'm sorry
applicant
about
did.
that.
Well, again, the administration exception has been superseded by the first variance request and now the appeal. I think you're quite right in pointing out that perhaps the arguments on the administration on the administrative exception, I'm glad that we're not hearing that, I can barely say it. On the administrative exception application do seem to be very weak arguments.
Right.
And I think you're right to point out to the appellant that they need to be particularly stronger in terms of making the findings.
Right.
Other questions, Ms. Landergan, at this moment?
No, that was
Mr. Sheets?
This just for my clarification. When you started speaking, you introduced yourself as
My name is,
role.
I'm sorry?
Your role in this, or were you a friend, or were you? I don't remember what.
My name?
No. What is your role in, are you an advisor, or are you a
Yes.
consultant?
Professional.
Okay, I didn't catch that in the beginning, that's all I wanted. Thank you very much.
I became involved in this appeal. I was here when he was here for his variance application, but I was here on another
Oh, very good.
application for another issue.
Because you said you mentioned Honolulu,
my
and I was
office is
wondering
on
if you...
Honolulu.
All right, I thought you lived in a
Honolulu.
neighborhood or so.
And it's very close to where he lives.
Fantastic.
So
That works
it
for
was
me.
very easy for me to do drive-bys.
Very good, not a problem.
I have a general policy question. The administrative exception, it's only you can only do it one time. That's how it works, right? For a given property.
Under 100 square foot.
That's probably true.
Is it?
You only get
Can you
one shot at
accumulate
the
it?
100 feet.
I don't think you can come in and do 99 feet at a time, if that's what
Right.
you're asking.
I see. Okay. Another 100, another 100.
Well, I mean that's the rule,
Well,
right?
that's why they guard against it, right?
And then if you do, so for example, if we did approve this 200 square foot addition, they still have the ability to come and do another administrative exception, right?
Sure.
Oh, potentially for the 100 feet, you mean?
For another.
Because they
As long as
haven't
they- as they-
used up the administrative exception.
Yeah, and as long as they don't bounce against lot area coverage or any other sort of...
And that's, that's fully within. So, I'm just saying that's another issue, is if we do give them this 200 square feet, is they can always come back and get another 100 square
I
feet.
guess we need to
Addition.
consider that they could come back with another variance or administrative exception in the future. I'm sorry, just a moment, because I'm not sure that Mr. Yusayan's done.
Oh,
Yeah, that's just my concern and question regarding that.
Is that correct, in terms of what staff understands?
In terms of applications, yes, they can file multiple applications, but I believe the findings weaken after every application is
Right.
continually processed, and therefore staff triggers this sort of bootlegging, not bootlegging,
Right.
piecemealing for effect, and therefore we do tend to deny those if we anticipate that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mr. Lee, you had a question?
Just for the record, I know that, from the drawing itself, it seemed to be under the FAR requirement, but I haven't seen any numbers going from, what FAR to, with the addition,
We submitted that.
I'm sorry?
We submitted that today.
Where is that at?
There's a
It's the
chart.
legal size.
This chart here?
Up in the chart,
This gentleman.
Oh, okay.
and their property is at the bottom of the page.
Oh, okay, proposed, okay. Sometimes, normally this is a part of the report that we get, but, we didn't see that.
For public consumption, what the applicant or appellant has put together is a total of 27 properties, indicating that the average floor area, that the lots are all identical, and that the average floor area is 1,392 for those 27 properties, where the subject property currently is 1,121 and proposed to 1,345. And I'm just putting that in so
Right.
people at home can,
You turned this item in also initially, or is this
Today.
something after the fact?
this is the first
No,
thing.
today.
Okay.
But normally it's done by our staff, rather than, turned in, right?
Staff to see.
No, I think the applicant and appellant normally would do this, but
Yeah.
frequently we see it earlier. And I'll just jump in and say, it usually is a disservice, unless it works well with your presentation, it wasn't too bad, to wait until the hearing to give us stuff, because we don't have time to really parse it. So for future reference, get it to us so that we have time to look it over first. But
I understand. I
it
thought
rolled
about
okay
it.
with your presentation, but nonetheless.
I appreciate that, but
Does
given
anyone
what's
else have a
happened with
question?
some of the stuff in the file,
I have a
we
couple
decided
if
to
no one
hold
else
back.
has questions at this moment. All right. It's permitted, it's allowed, but what's the current use of the guest house? I presume it has a bathroom in it, and I presume you have somebody staying there.
Somebody stays when, occasionally I'll have people visit and they'll stay.
So it's not
There's
being
nobody-
rented, it's an occasional. Okay, just was curious how it was being made use of. The kitchen permit you granted, it was all internal, there was no window replacements, it's literally something happening within the footprint of your house?
one little wall knocked down within there to make it a little bit.
Oh, within this space,
Oh, yeah.
no footprint. Okay. Now, there was an objection from a neighborhood association. Do you happen to know if that's, quote-unquote, your neighborhood association?
It says Spar Heights, and I'm in Spar Heights. I've never heard of them before, and we just received that. I walked in today.
Understood. So you're not familiar with them as a neighborhood association, because my next question is, did you happen to reach out to them, let them know what you were doing or anything? And I guess what you're saying is you didn't even know they existed.
That's right.
Okay. Because, networking...
By the same
with-
token, I don't think they had an opportunity to look at this application either.
No, the letter doesn't state that they've looked at it,
Yeah.
and frankly, I imply the same thing, that they haven't really looked at what it is.
Right.
It's more of a general philosophy
Yes.
that they're stating in their objection. You indicated something where you said it was a foregone conclusion.
I felt that.
All right, talk about that a little more. Why do you
Well,
think it's foregone? Why do you think you didn't get a fair hearing?
Because when the administrative exception was taken in, it was, there was one attitude altogether. He was shocked. First of all, he was shocked when it was kicked back to him because it was, given to him by a senior staff member. And he, in good faith, went through applied for the administrative exception. And then something happened. Something happened.
Well,
And-
something happened. Somebody read the rules.
Somebody...
I mean, I hear where you're coming from, and certainly I can appreciate why a layperson would just be merrily going along. But for those of us that have some familiarity, it's like, well, of course it's not an AE.
And would you not expect a fail-safe?
Well, it shouldn't have happened. I mean, it just shouldn't have happened. But the point is that all of the interactions that he had with staff, he was, I'm sure it wasn't intentional by staff, I have to say that, but he felt like he was led down this path, a path that would ultimately lead him to a 224 square foot addition without having to provide a two-car garage. And the hearing that I attended for his variance was, it just seemed to me as though the whole attitude going in was just, it was going to be denied, and you could just tell.
Ms. Landergan.
Well, and none of us were there, and neither were you, but perhaps the conversation was not specific when your client came in and talked to the planning personnel, and they said, yes, certain square footages meet an exception if it's under 100 square feet.
Pretty clear.
Very clear.
But I mean, he can accept it. and-
Clearly stated.
But you're saying that the conversation led him to fill this out. I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know who filled out the application, but I
don't
doubt the
either.
planning department did.
Oh, no, I'm sure they
So
didn't.
somebody else did. You can take the application home and you can fill it out. And-
I want
and you can
to
say-
add 224 square feet. Okay, very good.
May I finish first?
Yes.
Thank you. So you can take the planning application home, you can fill it out, you can come back, and even if the planner took it there, they may not look at it at that time. They could just take it in. I'm saying that your scenario is one scenario, there could be another scenario. I'm just trying to say that let's not presume that the senior planner looked at it and said, oh yeah, this is a shoo-in, and that's what the scenario presented. So I
I wasn't
feel
there,
that-
but Mr. Demis was, and I'm sure he can address
And
that.
I'm not trying to actually have a conversation because you presented one scenario. I'm presenting an alternative scenario that neither of us were privy to. So
Yes.
once you receive an application as a planner, you take it in. So I'm saying there could easily not have been a conversation. It could have just been a busy time and they took it in. So I would like to not implicate staff without better information. I see that it's signed, but I don't know what happened when that happened. I used to be a planning staff, and I can tell you, not here, that there are times when you get information and you give information, and when it comes back, there are misunderstandings, and that is why there is a fail-safe. So you're saying it shouldn't have happened. I'm saying we're glad it happened. You should not let exceptions go through if they're wrong. So that's it.
Maybe by itself it's not a big deal, but in the totality of everything that I've presented to you, and the fact that things are, removed from the file, lost, misplaced, whatever, not presented to you, things that maybe were in the file that should have been given to you, like the traffic and transportation memo, I got that out of the case file. Whether it's still there or not, I don't know.
Ms. Williams? Like letters. So,
They're all on.
You might be.
They're all on.
oh, I hit the red button. My fault. I hit that. Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia. You're invaluable. All right. So let's just stick to the findings we need to make and the facts of the case. We've heard what you've said in terms of the path that got you to this point. Let's focus on where we're at and where we need to move forward, okay? So,
if I could just say something, I don't know why it's not a more significant factor that even with the 224 additional square feet, I will still have less square footage than the average home in the neighborhood on the same size lot.
it's a fair point to make. You are making it. That resonates. That's fine. All right. Other questions? Now, I will also point out you'll have a rebuttal period after we're done with some questions or some other comments from staff. Any other questions at this moment for the applicant or the appellant? I would just telegraph to focus on those four findings. You've heard through our questions that at least one or two of us up here may be having difficulties making them. I would suggest in your rebuttal you redouble your efforts in that regard. And we're going to allow you to sit for a few minutes while we chat with staff and get a little more of their side of the story. All right, staff rebuttal period, if you will, or staff information, I should say. I know we're going to have some questions for you, I suspect.
Okay. I'll start with the, just clarification with the administrative exception application. That was, in fact, the original application that was filed. It was discovered that the square footage at a later time was exceeded the amount of 100 square feet. The application was withdrawn and a refund was given to the homeowner. In that sense, a new application was then filed, a variance application. I do not have the exact date of the variance application that it filed, but it was after the administrative exception. Ms. Williams made a comment on the original staff report that I presented to the planning hearing officer regarding the interdepartmental comments. Yes, a total of 13 departments are routed and notified and asked for received comments. Staff rarely indicates all comments from all 13 departments. At the time of the hearing, the planning hearing officer reviews and reads in all the comments that are significant. The planning hearing officer did that at that time. One slight clarification on the comments from the traffic administrator. The traffic administrator states that the driveway is over 90 feet and can serve as storage capacity. That's a slight error because the traffic administrator is not aware that you cannot store parking in the interior setback of that. So that, unfortunately, he may have thought that that was an option, but it goes against the intent of the zoning code. And lastly, to address the comment that the applicant was led down the wrong path, there were conversations with the homeowner, with myself and the senior planner, Roger Kiesel, on the determination what we were going to recommend ahead of time originally. There was discussion on possibly refunding the application portion so that we could somewhat salvage this application. That was discussed previously. Staff received verbal communication by the homeowner to proceed with the hearing and to to see what the actual hearing would have in store for him. So it was by direction of the homeowner to proceed to the hearing, knowing what the recommendation would be. Just wanted to know that, and I think that was important and addressed. One, to touch bases on the mishandling of the parking study and the variance application. At the time of the hearing, the parking study was submitted to staff. It was passed on to the planning assistant and then to the hearing officer. The original variance application had always stayed in the file. It was only to the time when the planning hearing officer took it in for review, under that review, the mixtures of papers, that's when we discovered that the parking study was missing, not till later. The variance application also was missing. That wasn't until recently. That had to have been maybe about a month ago. And that was with all the handling that comes involved in then routing a planning commission case. So I do take responsibility for the missing of the original variance application in doing that. Those are my comments as of...
So when you rendered the decision letter, you did have the parking information?
Yes. Yeah, I did.
Yes, I did. And all the... I'm Brett Collin. I was a hearing officer on the subject project. All the exhibits were reviewed. All the items that were submitted were reviewed. And information and testimony received at the hearing was taken into consideration before the final decision was made.
So any of the documents that was turned in today by the applicant, any of these applications new to you? Or?
Well, anything that was turned in today really doesn't affect my decision since I've already rendered it back in December. My decision was based off of, do they make the four required findings? My review of the application, my review of the plans is they cannot make all the required findings. It was felt that they could put a two-car garage. Code-wise, they could put it at the rear corner of the property. If you're looking at the dimensions that are out there, as Gabe mentioned, it's a 20 by 20 minimum dimension. It looks like the plans are showing approximately, 17, 18 feet, so they were looking at potentially adding, if they had to, 2 feet additional. If they decided to, I'm just throwing this out hypothetically, to demolish the garage that was there and change the existing guest house, they could make that rear guest house into a code-compliant two-car garage. Wouldn't be close to the 25-foot turning radius. Therefore, they couldn't meet the hardship requirement there because it would be very simple code-wise to be able to go forward and to meet code requirements, which is one of the things when you're looking at a variance, as you know, what's the hardship? And I couldn't see one when I could see that it's a basic lot, the same dimensions as most of the other lots in the area, basically a flat lot. There weren't any constraints other than possibly financial reasons that prevented me or letting me to believe that there was an actual hardship that was preventing them from meeting code. In addition, when you add square footage to a single-family house, whether it's 1 square foot or 224 square feet, it triggers bringing the parking up to the code requirements. The other thing that I took into consideration, whether it's 224 or whatever the square footage is, if this were hypothetically to be approved, my thinking was that this was going to be precedent-setting and then would be, would then have an impact on the area, with anyone else coming in, maybe applying for 300 square feet now that if this was hypothetically approved at 224. And then it just exacerbates basically the whole situation, again, which is not what the code is trying to encourage.
I was just curious, the applicant was, asked to ask for, submit administrative exception application, and also later down the road, to apply for the variance application. Did they get reimbursement for the? administrative exception application?
Yes, they did. They got full reimbursement for that.
Just for the record, I wanted to know.
Yes. That email that you have, other commissioners would like to see that once you've read it, Mr. Lee. Additional questions for staff? Seeing nothing at this time. Ms. Williams, you have rebuttal time, up to 15 minutes.
Yes, that's true. Whether you're asking for 1 or 224 square feet, a two-car garage is required.
No, up to 100.
That's what we have,
No, let's clarify that, if you don't mind.
Well, they expect you to bring the property up to code. But that's what this process is for, to offer relief where it could be burdensome or onerous. The code does envision property upgrades from time to time, and I think that in this case, we're not adding people to the mix, we're not adding bodies to the mix, we're not adding cars to the mix. We're under the floor area ratio for the neighborhood. We're compatible with other similar garages in the neighborhood. It was submitted with our neighborhood compatibility study that we did. I don't know what I can add that I haven't already touched on. I just feel that this is what the process is for, and if he had to do a two-car garage, it would cause, yes, a financial hardship, which I know the code doesn't recognize, but also, Mr. Demis has trees that he's cultivated back there. He's got gardens that he's cultivated back there that he continues to cultivate, and he doesn't want to lose that. Above and beyond the financial aspects of it. He's not adding a floor or story, or he's not going out of scale with anything in the neighborhood. We ask your consideration.
May I ask?
Yes, sir.
What the staff has, proposed for you to add the additional garage there, extending out, from existing wall there. How much of the gardening or the backyard that you feel that you're losing? That
would be the entire grape arbor and the deck.
It would be light.
You have to come up here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't understand. The home would lose value because of so much more driveway I would have to create in order to have a turnout for the car. I'd be destroying some really nice landscape that I have back there. And I won't do it. I don't want to destroy the laundry room that I have, or there's a little breezeway next to it which would have to be destroyed. For what? Nobody brings their cars back there anyway. Everybody just brings their cars into the driveway in the front. We're talking about an area that does not have a parking problem. At no time do you see more than 20% of the cars taking spaces on the street. This is beyond me. I just don't understand why. I understand Glendale has a parking problem, but not in my area. And I just don't understand why this is such a strict code. Well, there's nothing more I can say.
Just one quick question. Hopefully this wasn't asked already. The area where you want to do the add-on, is there landscape in there right now?
It's grass.
Just grass right now.
Yeah, happy
No-
without lawn.
No
None-
patio there,
none
no
of the
concrete,
trees.
no trees, no plants.
The deck is next to that.
Okay. You anticipated my question, actually, Mr. Lee. I wondered if you were taking out a tree with the addition.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the appellant at this time? Closing remarks from the appellant. frequently in our deliberations, we reopen the hearing as other questions come up. We'll see if that happens today or not. I'm going to thank you very much, and I will ask staff for closing remarks.
Staff has no comments at this time.
Absent questions from commissioners, we'll close the public hearing. We'll enter deliberations. Who'd like to lead off with their initial thoughts? Mr. Lee?
There seemed to been, and it was also admitted by our staff that there was some administrative, mistakes that was made with this case. And we do make mistakes, and I think that some of the points were made by our Commissioner Landrigan, in regards to that. Now, as far as if being led down the to the wrong path with the administrative exception, it has been corrected. So now here we are. As far as whether it was wrong to begin with, now will another two wrongs make it right? I do not think so. We do. If this was a case where if there was no other way to remedy this problem, then I really like to sympathize with the applicant. But I think this is a self-imposed economic hardship. So looking at this, I cannot find the four findings, and I like to side with our staff's decision. Sustain.
All right, Mr. Lee. Mr. Sheets.
I'd like to start out by saying that I truly appreciate the work that was done by the appellant's consultant, and I'm really pleased with all the information you brought in. The detail and the professionalism was very great. It was very clear, very concise, and it really helped, and can't help but make me sympathetic for the cause. On top of that, I have to share some disappointment with, and I don't understand what this is, but the loss of paperwork or the misplacing of paperwork. That's disappointing, because the sooner all of this information is available up front, the better decision we can make. And so I appreciate your efforts on that and bringing it forth to us. Having said that, if I was in your place, actually if I was further back and I was a person trying to come in like the appellant and get this variance, having not sat up here and having not gone through other variance requests, I would not understand. At times it seems to not be logical. But having seen so many cases where the zoning has to take a stand on an issue, they have to mark a point in time where, based on what the city thinks, based on what the public thinks, you have to make a point so that larger problems don't occur. Your instance seems very simple, but your neighbors or somebody in another neighborhood would not be so simple. It would be a lot more complicated. So that's why we have the zoning rules. Gives us some clarity about what to do in somewhat similar cases. But it's not for one, it's for all. And I guess that's where some of the misunderstanding comes in. Personally, I can't make. I start out in the beginning with finding A. It's self-imposed, and when I go from that point, it makes it difficult for me personally, based on what I see and what I know, to make any of the findings. I see the logic, I see the thinking, but based on the code, it's difficult for me to truly understand them. And I know that that's not going to sit well with the appellant, but from this side, that makes sense to me. And the one thing that stuck in my mind through this whole process, I think there's a trade-off. You can do something with the garage to make it work, because that's what the code requires. And in your case, it might be about the landscaping, and some other case, it might be about a child planted a tree next to, I mean, it could be anything, and that's why we have the zoning code. We make a mark, we establish an understanding of what can and can't be, and trade-off could be you could fix the garage, make it work, and do your add-on. You just choose not to do that. So that's my thinking on it.
Ms. Landrigan?
Well, I'd like to apologize for the planning staff losing your materials. I'm sure that's extremely frustrating, and it's frustrating to us also. And I'm sure it's frustrating to the planners who are following up on it. It doesn't give a good feeling. But nevertheless, there is a process, and that process, the hardest thing about planning commission decisions is they deal with the three legs called health, safety, and welfare. And the hardest one is welfare, and that's what planning covers. And it covers it in air and setbacks and sometimes things that are really hard to bite down on. And they seem arbitrary, but they set a pattern. And I think your presentation was extremely strong, and I think all of your findings were very well presented, but they did not meet the one finding that is really key to us. And if one finding isn't there, it's part of the whole house of cards. It just will not stand up. So the hardship is indeed that you have set up a very nice space in your backyard, but you're willing to intrude into it with an addition to create your comfort. And every personal indulgence of this has a pushback from the code. And that pushback here is that the requirement is you bring your parking up to code. And there is a variance, but you have to make the core findings. You can put in that two-car garage and put your laundry in there too. You're not going to lose your laundry room. You don't have to even park your cars in there. And I would tell you most people don't. You're right. It doesn't seem logical. But the finding isn't there, and that is what we have to make our determination on. And as eloquent and heartfelt and realistic as it is there, I can't see how I could do it, because that's really what our criteria is. So please accept my apology for the other reasons that happened to you, and I hope they don't happen to anyone else.
Your sign.
Well, definitely, obviously, we have the code for a reason. And up here, we have to look at it not in terms of just one specific project, but in totality of how this may set a precedence for other future projects. I know that the applicant kept bringing up the idea that the variance process is for a scenario like this, and I know the variance process is for an unusual circumstance that the code may not be able to allow, and the variance is for the things that it can't all be spelled out in the code, such as a real hardship that may exist. And another part of me, though, is also says that when we have 100 square foot, when something is written literally in the code, and we do have a variance process, I know sometimes we have been open to allow for some flexibility. You know, if it's a little bit over than 100 square feet. And so I know we ourselves haven't always been so strict on the code. It's not 1,000 square feet more. It's not maybe 500 square feet more, but it's 100 square feet more than the administrative exception. So a part of me says, and looking at it from that way for this specific property, even though there isn't a real specific hardship, obviously adding another parking space for this property would not be the most ideal situation. And I think looking at it from the code perspective, writing it down, the code's writing it for something very general, and it's very logical why we have to have, a specific number in the code, and to say anything after this, you have to have an additional parking space, which makes sense and it's very logical. And it's true, we do have a variance process that we can look at these specific cases and evaluate if this poses that type of condition where we can allow maybe that flexibility. So I've been kind of torn between the two. And maybe considering all the things that the applicant has gone through for this specific case, even though I know it was spelled out to him before going into the hearing that it may not be approved, that I may make an exception just because it's only 100 square feet more than the administrative exception. It's not significantly more than that. And I think that would still be cautious enough from setting a very bad precedence, which I know we've already done this before by being somewhat flexible. So I've been kind of torn between the two, and I'm not leaning very strongly either side. I may hear last thing from Chairman Kane and see if that may switch me one way or the other. But that's where I stand right now.
Okay. Well, and this is why we call it deliberations. We all kind of throw out our initial thoughts. We build on them. We think of things that we hadn't thought of, and so on. For me, well, I guess the first thing that I would do in terms of looking at the findings is sometimes we have to read the whole sentence, and we have to think about what are they really trying to say there. It isn't that there's no hardship. It's what's impractical. What's unnecessary, but what's impractical, and what's the intent of the ordinance. And so that's where I'm finding more of a gray area, an area that I want to be able to exploit. To me, the intent of the ordinance is not to do anything on a property that's going to impact the neighborhood or the community at large. So that's number one. Whatever you're doing on that property, if it's going to affect a neighbor, if it's going to affect the benefit of the neighborhood, that's a tough hill to climb. I look at the specific property, the specific project, and so on. We have a project that is basically creating a master bathroom suite. He's not adding a bedroom. He's not adding anything that's going to add any more parking. He's adding a bathroom, admittedly a large bathroom. And we could argue about the size of the bathroom as it relates to the need of the variance. But nonetheless, you do have a fallback. You could go to a smaller bathroom, okay? And I'm just checking to make sure I haven't turned off my mic again.
You have to say it all again.
At first, I thought Tom Mitchell's comments were interesting, but staff has quite rightly pointed out that even though everyone does it, using your driveway in the side area is really not, allowed. We know in practical terms it happens, but it's not really a solution. The project is in the rear of the property. It impacts no other neighbor in terms of the project itself. It's not impacting the guy to the left, the right, the neighborhood, a plane flying over it. It impacts no one. It's well contained within the property. Roof lines aren't changing. It's not creating a tower. Nothing like that's going on. It's modest in terms of its impact. The other thing I look at, and it goes back to the idea of unnecessary hardship or practical difficulties, is, and I'm not necessarily talking economic, but I go, at what price at what cost is forcing the code onto this project worth it? And I'm persuaded by the testimony and just by my own review at the site is the idea of destroying vegetation, destroying mature trees, basically tearing up the backyard to create a driveway simply to humor a part of the code that's in for a reason. I think in, again, specific case, specific property, that this project can be approved. I was concerned about precedent, but precedent, when we talk about the specifics of a property, the size of it, the fact that they're not adding bedrooms, that they're not changing roof line, that it's in the rear of the house, and even the parenthetical things about the parking study. I take the parking study with a grain of salt, and if frankly, if it had been a different part of Glendale, you'd have a much greater problem. But, it wasn't professionally done. I mean, it was done with good intent, but it wasn't professionally done. So I just need to go, okay, in my trips to that neighborhood, what am I seeing? Well, it's similar to what the appellant has said. So I'm comfortable that within the neighborhood, this isn't, that they don't have an existing parking problem. I don't see that this is going to create a greater hardship on it. And I'm starting to repeat myself with basically for all the things that I've laid out about, what is a practical difficulty? What makes sense for a property owner to have rights on his property as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else? I'm inclined to grant it for those reasons. And I understand that there's some difficulty in making findings because of the way it might be interpreted. But that's the rationale and the path that I'm looking at. Mr. Lee.
In view of your comments, Chair, Chairman Kane, you're kind of looking at it as more of a macroscopic view rather than very microscopic interpretation of the strict application of the code here. I think you may be making the point in that, by even with the addition, it is, well under the norm of the neighborhood, and with the FAR, that is 0.2, and it is a very minimal addition, and every case is case by itself. It stands alone, and I do not see this as a precedent setting. I think I'm going to switch my head, and start thinking in terms of going in that direction.
And thank you for bringing up the FAR. That was a point I was going to make as well. So it actually reinforced what I was thinking. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Okay.
I see. I was looking for Ms. Landrigan.
Well, I would like to discuss a few of the things you said. You said forcing the code to meet this. And interestingly enough, it's the applicant who has brought this up and asked us to force the code. So the code is there. You have to set a standard, and unfortunately, I think that if you look at some of the other determinations that we had, and in hillside areas where there were truly hardships that we did not pass it, this seems very arbitrary and capricious if you're going to make this exception based on this. Plus, I might bring to your attention item number B, finding number B, that there are exceptional circumstances or conditions applicable to the property involved or to the intended use or development of the property that do not apply generally to other property in the same zone or neighborhood. You can't make that finding.
You can't make that finding, it sounds like. I
tell me how you can make
the
it.
word capricious. I mean, we're talking about a specific property in a specific case. To bring up something about hillside properties and something we may or may not have done on a different project, I'd want specifics. So let's just keep focused.
I'm keeping focus.
I respect our difference of opinion
I'm
on
not
this
calling
property.
you capricious. I'm saying the decision that would allow a flat piece of property to have another 100 square feet and other areas where that we did not, that had more of the true interpretation of the word practical hardships. leads me to believe that we have to look at this in a very stricter interpretation than is being proposed.
What do you think the objectives of the ordinance are as it relates to this property in terms of somebody putting on a small addition that's not impacting any of the neighbors in any way? Or how do you view this impacting the neighbors?
I view the fact that there are no exceptional circumstances. I also look that there's no hardship except for a self-imposed hardship. And I see that we have 4 guidelines here, and the variance is to be based on the 4 guidelines. And that's what I'm saying. It's not on our interpretation of it. If we want to find a gray area, I think that once you start a precedent, I agree. I agree with the planning original direction is that once you start chipping away at it, why do we have the code? The code sets a reasonable standard, and then once you start to exceed it, you can continue to exceed it, and that's been a problem in Glendale before, and I think I'm just cautioning that I think that interpretation might be reconsidered by those who are talking about it.
Those are fair comments. Mr. Sheets?
Yeah, I would I'll just state that the thought process you caused me to go through with your comments, or the thought process I went to during my personal deliberation, but what happened to me during your discussion was the same thing that goes through my mind every time we do a variance. And when I look at it from the broad view, what comes to mind, if I approve this one, why can't I approve the one that's 300 feet? Why can't I approve the one? To me, the slippery slope that could open up, not that this causes that. That's not where my mind's going. It's just that, what is the limit? Where does it stop? And there have been many times that I wanted to use that thinking in past discussions, past deliberations. So, in my mind, what happens if I do that now, then I weaken my look at the next time we have a variance that's somewhat similar to this. And this is not an uncommon, a common request, an uncommon add-on. We had one up by the hospital at one point, I remember. There was a small add-on off the kitchen. I don't remember if there was an FAR issue. I know that may not be relevant, but that came to mind. It was something similar. We denied that.
Unit.
Yeah, we denied that. But so all I'm saying is, I know where we're going, and I really appreciate the thought process that's going on here. I think it's what this Planning Commission offers every time, and I'm trying to be straight on how we look at these things and keep a focus that allows me to make a similar decision on every case. So I appreciate what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from. It kind of tears at my personal feelings about the issue, but from a true code standpoint and what this could be and how precedent setting it could be, I'm still not convinced that we have to reverse this denial.
Mr. Usain?
I guess the difference, what I'm seeing is that it's a clear interpretation of the code versus the evaluation of what the objective of the ordinance is. And I think that's what the difference here is being discussed, and I think that's very interesting. And we have ruled before on the strict language of a code. I think we do that a lot, and we have also done it based on the objective of what we believe the objective of the ordinance is. And it's hard. It's hard for me to make the decision. I am, I think, leaning towards going with the objective of what the ordinance is based on everything I said and then what Chairman Kane had presented as well. I think it makes sense. It's logical. It's not hurting anybody. It's not hurting the public welfare. And it's not going to be imposing the use of an extra car. I don't see how that's going to happen. I understand what's written in the code is very legitimate, and it needs to be written that way. because otherwise it's going to be harder to understand. I mean, it's going to be harder for us to make decisions, but the code also does allow for administrative exceptions for 100 square foot additions, and that's an arbitrary number as well. It's made as a reasonable number. It's put there, but I understand that that there might be some flexibility to that, and it's not going 300 square feet more or 500 square feet more, but it's 100 square feet more or 120. And I think I'm okay with that based on what we've also done before. And that may have been already a precedence that has been set. May or may not be good, but we'll find out, I guess.
Well, anybody that uses the P word,
Yeah.
I'm going to smack down pretty hard. Because every one of these, we work very hard to make sure that it's focused on the specifics of the property in the case.
Right.
So we're not going to use the P word. We're not going to use the M word, mold, which, anyway.
Which is true, because we've never brought up a case before. No, but it's a fair point, because we've never brought up a case before. We've never even heard of an applicant say, "Oh, these guys did it, and now we're doing it."
Well, and I want to, because you raise, again, these findings are tough to make. We know that.
They are.
I mean, and
They're
there's a
meant to
reason. And you raised, again, making the second finding about the exceptional circumstances to the property, that's a difficult one to make. But I can make that on several counts, because it's not simply the topography or the physical dimensions, it's actually what's currently on the property. So we already have an existing guest house. We already have, mature trees. We already have a physical dimension to the property where if you made a two-car garage, what you'd have to do to create the turnaround would be atrocious. Admittedly, then it starts getting back into the self-opposed type of things, admittedly. But for all of those, again, I find the path to rationalize through that one. You're absolutely right. I could easily see I do see your perspective on it, and some nights I would absolutely agree with it. It's just not tonight. Not tonight on this one. Further discussion. Counterpoint.
One thought came to mind as you were summarizing just then. Even though we try to look at this particular instance and what the balances are, I can't help but think, I'm tainted being on the Planning Commission, I can't help but think sometimes, or at least bring into my thinking, what is the next person going to say 20 years from now? Mm-hmm. They're going to say, well, you allowed that to happen, so I can't make the parking. If they want to add on, they can still do an administrative decision, an administrative request. So, although I understand why I want to make the decision for them, but I also want to try to be standard with the code. And what happens 10 years from now? I think that plays an important role in how we make these decisions. What happens 20 years from now? We have this beautiful list that lists all the houses and how many have one-car garages, how many have two-car garages. That was then. That isn't now. And we put the code in place so we can determine, discuss, and define what happens today, so that tomorrow we don't have that problem. So that's where that's an additional layer or facet of where I'm coming from.
I respect that position, that opinion. Absolutely. Ms. Landergan.
And just to make one other point, I think it's important to look at the individual lot, but we're making a decision for all of Glendale and for what will be, whether we hear that request that somebody else did it. I know for a fact, having been a planning staff on the counter, that people come in and they say, they allowed it before, why would they not allow it now? I know that for a fact. So once we do this, it's out there. I mean, somebody's seen it. It's now part of the record. So it does set a precedent. And that is my concern about just slowly chipping away at once we say, well, and there was a set, there were no 100 square feet until somebody said, well, there needs to be an exception, and that's what the administrative exception is. And the findings are looser for that. So in that exception, I don't think they were made. Now there's a variance where the findings are even harder, and they still aren't made. And so to me, it seems that you make those findings and the variance can be granted. It's not you make 3 of the findings or 2 of the findings and we'll look at the others. To me, that just seems to be what we're discussing here, and that's the concern I have with the ability to undermine the code in the long run for the longer picture, for all of Glendale as opposed to for just this one home.
Mr. Lee. And by the way, we're all going to get our last shots in, and then I'll call for a question.
All right.
Sure.
Because we're all making fair points, but I don't know if it's going to evolve much further.
I mean, this case, I thought was a slam dunk, and now it's becoming a very, really, basic.
We should be in a coffee shop when debating this.
Debating the very, issue of, the core of a variance process here, and I agree with all of my, fellow commissioners here, and it's really, matter of, I guess, interpretation. That's why we have our body here, and if we were to just go strict, interpretation of the code, you don't need this body here. There are some cases. Sometimes, we look at it in different views, and which I started out doing this, but then, found my way to look in a little bit more broader sense, in that, what was the, the whole atmosphere and the whole neighborhood, like, and how will this project affect the rest of the neighborhood? And that's what, Chairman Kane brought into the picture. And that's what made, my decision sway in the direction that I'm going now. It is a tough job that we have, but I think there are times when, even the fact that, I think we are very conscientious people here, that I do not think that what we do here in each specific cases, that we will, continue to hand out, the plan, what is it, carte blanche, for the people to do things. I think we will continue to struggle to make this type of decision. So I'm very confident in our ability to review each case, and I feel comfortable switching my decision and going with approving this case for the client of applicant.
Mr. Yassine, is there anything you'd like to add?
No.
Well said. Succinct, to the point. And I think my comments have been recorded as well. Absent any final plea from anyone, I'd like to ask someone to make a motion. And we'll have to make some findings if we're going to overturn.
Oh, let me give it a shot. Okay, 4 findings. The first one, the strict application of the provisions of any such ordinance presents practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship because it's with the general purpose intent of the ordinance. With the minimum addition, and that is, to the existing bedroom. They're not adding bedroom, but for that, it seems there is a difficulties and necessary hardship of trying to impose adding a second the garage there, and what exceptional circumstances or conditions apply to the property involved or to the intended use or development of the property that do not apply generally to the other property in the same zone or neighborhood. In review of what the applicant has turned in, comparing this property with the rest of the property, like I said, there is no additions here other than the fact that there is enlarging the bedroom in the rear part of the house. So, I see that, there is really that, that does not really, affect other properties here. And it is pretty much, within or conforming to the rest of the neighborhood. Why will granting of the variance not be a detriment to the public welfare? Same thing, they're not increasing the number of occupants living there. There's really no real change to the property other than the small addition in the back. Why will granting of the variance be in keeping with the objectives of the ordinance? Granting of the ordinance, I think we talked about it today, is really the welfare of the people who live around there. And I see a lot of the support letters that came in from the neighbor, and although that there was one objection letter from the neighborhood association, that the scope of work itself really is minimum and keeping within the FAR. That I think it is keeping the objective of the ordinance, and I do not have any problems with that. If you want to add something more to that.
So, having said that,
Having said that,
Are you
want to go to the
no,
motion?
I think his next step was to
So
Make a motion.
make a motion. I thought that was the intent.
right. So I have to make the motion that
Sorry about
upon
that.
No problem. I just wasn't sure where you're
I was
going.
just I thought I was going to come after
So you move.
the back way.
So that I move, upon review and consideration of all materials and exhibits of a current record relative to the variance case number PVAR 2011-013, located at Sierra Vista Avenue. And after having conducted a hearing on said matter, the Planning Commission hereby recommends approval of the granting of this variance.
Second.
I have a motion support. Call roll, please.
Yeah, just make,
I called for the motion. Is it really necessary?
I just want
I'll
to say
pull it
that
back.
those findings are now going to be on record as acceptable findings. Just wanted to say that.
And I have, excuse me, Mr. Chair, that I just want clarification from Mr. Lee that it's going to be approved with no conditions. Is that correct?
Is there a condition?
First, we'll pull back the motion and stuff. We're still in discussion. When you said conditions, I think you meant findings.
Well,
or
it says here
explanation.
either approved with conditions or without. And also
Right,
that
it's approved,
that
right.
what he stated he has made those 4 findings. Those are now going to be on record as 4 acceptable findings, correct?
So I attempted, yes.
For acceptable findings for this specific.
And they can be used by anybody here for, correct, Mr. Garcia?
Well,
If you,
first off, Ms. Lendergan, you raise a good point.
No, I do.
Because what we want to make sure is in the effort that we're putting forth that the findings are succinctly clear for the record. And we had a series of discussion points. Mr. Lee has stated in the course of pushing forward a motion his findings. What I guess I would ask staff to read back is what are you hearing in terms of that motion for each of the findings? I'd like staff to kind of regurgitate that, if you would.
Okay.
Probably I could have found a better word than that. Not to imply what the content was, that it required to be regurgitated, but...
well, I mean, you're welcome to add more to it to beef it up.
Well, and that's what you asked for
Right.
before Mr. Sheets forced you to make it.
Guilty.
Okay, in summary, I will take this under review. I will review the tape, produce conditions, and then subject for your approval later on. But for condition A, I have...
Well, all right, so that's a different thing. So now we're going to table this for the purposes of staff preparing the findings.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Garcia.
You can do it one of two ways. You can direct staff to come back with findings. The hearing closed will come back with the findings. That way you can have a chance to see them in written form, and staff can sort of take what was stated by the commissioners, including Commissioner Lee, who made the motion, and also incorporate evidence from the record into the findings and to bring those back for you to review, or we can kind of try to slough through it here on the record. It's really up to you. My suggestion is to keep the hearing closed and to continue to allow staff to draft them. That way it's clear, and then I can even assist staff in preparing the findings so we can do the best job we can to both make them the best findings we can, but also address Ms. Landrigan's concern.
Boy, I'm certainly in favor of that because we don't want that slippery slope.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chairman Kano,
Thank you.
you may also want to add conditions. There are certain conditions that we add as standard onto most variances, things like they have to follow the plan that was reviewed, they have to follow other rules of the city with regards to permitting. So we can add those too.
All right, so let me ask, before we consider a motion to continue for the purposes of preparing findings, our next meeting, this should be a fairly brief process, but are we all going to be at the next meeting, to our knowledge?
To my knowledge.
Which is this month.
No, it's no, I have April 20th.
Oh, my phone's up.
Yeah, we have right now on April 20th, we have one tentative parcel map and one 4-unit condominium, so you do have...
And we'd crowd this in anyway. I just want to make sure there's
I'm here.
5 of us, or at least 3 that'll go one way or the other.
No, that's, I think, a very important
Right.
consideration.
So it all sounds like we'll be here absent SIG alerts.
Problems, yeah.
All right. So with that, and to work through this properly with, rules of order, there was a motion, I even think there was a second,
There was.
but then we pulled it back.
All right.
So
There was a request
I
for
will
discussion.
re-enter the motion then.
Well, yeah, would it
Yeah.
help us through that, Mr.
I
Garcia?
think the maker of the motion should withdraw the motion.
Okay.
Right.
And then what does the second have to do, I think?
No.
All right.
To continue this case for...
Well, you're going to withdraw your original motion.
I will withdraw my motion.
Right. Would you like to make another motion?
An internal motion to continue this case for day certain April 20th to allow staff to make those 4 findings with the comments that was made by us commissioners, with Ms. Landrigan and myself, and with the help of city attorney, and with the conditions that the staff has mentioned that goes with the variance.
Standard conditions.
We have a motion seeking support. This is your chance, Ms. Landrigan. It was your idea.
I second.
Thank you. You can always vote no later for the
No, I will.
All right, we have a motion support. Call roll, please.
Aye.
Yes.
Commissioner Landrigan.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Yasayan.
Aye.
Chairperson Kane.
Aye, and a vote of 5-0, Planning Commission has continued the variance case PVAR 2010-013 to April 20th for the purposes of conditions and findings being finalized by staff. All right, moving on to the next agenda item. It's Planning Commission items, updates from the Planning Division.
Just a reminder that we are going to have a Greener Glendale community meeting. It's going to be Wednesday, April 27th. It'll be in MSB 105 and 106 from 5 to 7 p.m. And that's open to everybody. You'll see advertisements going out in the paper this weekend, starting this weekend. And so you're definitely invited to that, and we encourage you to encourage your neighbors to come and attend. And as far as upcoming meetings go, We now have 3 items on your agenda for April 20th. You have 3 items for the May 4th agenda. And then on your May 18th agenda, you have 2 items. So it looks like you have quite a few cases coming up.
What will be discussed in the Green Glendale?
What we're looking for
Meeting.
is, for the Greener Glendale community meeting, is what we're looking for suggestions from the community on ways that we can help reduce greenhouse gases produced within the community. So we have a municipal inventory, which talks about the greenhouse gases that are produced by city activities. And then this takes it further and looks at what are some options that the community might want to look at pursuing to have a greater impact community-wide. So this is basically our kickoff meeting for looking at community impacts. We're going to be taking testimony, hopefully. We'll get people supplying information and ideas. And with that, when we start an advisory committee, we'll be bringing those ideas to the advisory committee to have them vetted.
So do we have, the overall master plan as to, how we're going to, go in that direction as far as alternative, looking at alternative energies and, carbon reducing and, maybe electric cars and so on.
That's exactly what this plan is
Okay,
aimed
so-
at looking at on a community-wide basis. What are things members of the community can do? It's broken down into items like transportation, water conservation, energy efficiency. So we have quite a few different levels of ways that the community can participate.
So we don't have that plan yet, but this will
This
help you
is
to formulate
the
that.
first step
Okay.
to doing that,
Okay, good.
exactly.
Okay, good.
Where is it located again, the meeting?
It's going to be actually in this room and the one next door to us, MSB 103, or 105 rather, and 106. So that's a municipal services building, or 633 East Broadway for anybody watching TV.
Thanks.
Any comments from commissioners? Mr. Sheets?
I'd just like to compliment my fellow commissioners on the deliberation tonight. Again, that reconvinces me that nothing here is a slam dunk, but it allows me to be confident in how we work together, how we formulate our thinking, and it just excites me to be part of that process. So.
Mr. Sheets, thank you. I agree. I mean, just for example, Ms. Landrigan, noting that the path we're on could have been a little better, just everybody kind of making sure that we're, if you don't agree fully with what we're doing, at least you're making sure we're doing it on a good basis. So
Keep us honest.
that applies to all of us up here. I love you all, one and all. So anyway. Anything
Kumbaya.
else?
Kumbaya.
Yeah, kumbaya. So, all right. Anything else?
I move.
Just just to follow up on one of the questions that came out during the hearing, there was a question about how often can somebody apply for a case or a project. There are no limits if somebody's coming in for an administrative exception. However, if they are coming in for a variance or a conditional use permit, if it's been denied in whole or in part, they can't apply again within 6 months of the denial. So that's the only one where there is an exception. As far as cases where somebody comes in and does basically serial administrative exceptions, it is discretionary. There's no requirement that we grant them. And when we do notice that there's a pattern, we have in the past denied them. So to address your issue, yeah, we're aware of that could happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
So move.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Now, can you make it the parking structure?
I can.